Welcome to Wednesday Stash, where I share ways to help you keep your food for longer. We're going to talk about storing food today. Storing your canned food. Canning properly is really important. That's your first step. But after properly canning home canned foods, it's important to store these foods in the right way. So, after you finish processing, part of the whole processing method is you allow the food to cool properly, so that you can get sealed. It may take 12 to 24 hours, and after that time, what you're going to do is let the jars cool completely. You're going to check for seals. If you have the seals, you are going to remove these bands. Your canned food should not be stored with the bands on. Okay, and there are a lot of reasons. We're going to go over the reasons why you don't want to store with the bands on. But you're going to remove that band, and you're going to wipe your jar. You're going to wipe your jar off. And after you've wiped the jar off, and the reason that you're wiping the jar off is during the processing, there may have been food that has escaped from the jar during processing, and that could be on the outside of your jar, and that food could have grow mold. And then mold is airborne. That's just not a good situation that you want. So what you want to do is you don't want to disturb your seal, but you just want to clean those jars off, and then your next step will be that you're going to store it. Like I said, you're not going to store with your bands on. So once you remove these, wash them, dry them, and then store them for another use, because these are reusable. As long as they're in good condition, they don't have any bends, there's no rust, they can be used, many, many times. Whereas lids are a one-shot deal. So, once you've canned with it, when you're ready to can again, your jars reusable, but the lid you're going to use one time, and then when you're ready to can again, you're going to use a new fresh lids. Okay, so why not store with your bands on? First, storing with the bands on, if there has been food that's leaked under, that's where sometimes you might, when you're ready to open that jar, you can't get the jar open, or you have to get something because it's stuck. And that's because residue from food that has leaked, it's between the jar and the band, and over time it's, sticky. It just, causes the band to adhere. It's going to cause rust on the band and rust on your lid, which might also compromise your seal. And then if your seal is compromised, there's air, oxygen that can return back into your jar. And you could have, or if you didn't have a good seal in the first place, you had the band on, you had a vacuum, the top of your lid is concave, but you don't have a really good vacuum. A band, storing your jars with the bands on could disguise that you don't have a really good vacuum, and where it looks like everything is good, oxygen could still be getting in, allowing the growth of microbes that cause foodborne illness or food spoilage. So the band is hiding that. Whereas if you didn't have a good seal and the band is off, and you start having something, you have a compromised seal, or if something's growing, this band will loosen, and this lid will loosen, and you can tell. You'll have a loose lid. You might have leakage. You can tell that you have food that has spoiled and it needs to be discarded. So it's best, do not store with your bands on. Okay. So temperature. Where are you storing? Where do you want to store these jars? And you want to store them in temperature controlled space. So this might be kitchen cabinets, and it depends on the kitchen cabinet. I have a cabinet that's over the stove. I wouldn't store canned foods because it might get too warm in that cabinet from cooking. But I have a pantry that I do store canned foods in, or have upper cabinets, lower cabinets. Those are good spaces. It's temperature controlled. You have heat on in the winter. You have air conditioning on in the summer. If you're storing somewhere where, say, in a garage or a storage unit, somewhere that's not temperature controlled, or an attic, it could be an attic, it could be one space in the house that's not temperature controlled. Some closets that you might have can either get too hot or they can get too cold. And the reason you want to keep that in mind, when home canned food is stored in spaces that's too warm, you are going to speed up. You're going to reduce the shelf life, and you could speed up the occurrence of it causing food spoilage, because the temperature is just too high. It's going to shorten the shelf life. So you want to make sure it's not too hot, too warm of storage. And then on the flip side, you want to make sure it's not too cold. So if your home canned food has frozen, now just because it froze doesn't mean that it's not good anymore, but the things that you want to look for: did it freeze enough that the contents expanded and pushed on the bottom, pushed this lid from the inside and compromised the lid? That's something that can happen when your home canned food freezes. Or did it freeze and your jar was compromised? Your lid's going to go before your jar goes. But that's something that you want to keep in mind, that you're not compromising your seal because the food froze. So some of the things that you can do is, right now, depending on where you live, where you are, it's pretty cold and it's dropping below freezing at night. Insulate these jars, wrap them in newspapers, wrap them in blankets, wrap them in such a way where you can protect them from freezing temperatures, and then this way you can protect the food. Okay, so check out your storage space and make sure it's not too hot and it's not too cold. Okay, ideal temperatures for storing home canned foods for best quality is going to be between 50 and 70 degrees. So that's the ideal temperature. Now, other things other than just the temperature, you want to store your home canned foods in a cool, dark place. Okay, so we already spoke with the temperature, it's cool. We spoke about dark. You don't want to store your home canned foods on the windowsill. You don't want to store them in sunny locations. You want it to be cool. It's because that's going to generate heat. That's going to raise the temperature. You want to have it somewhere that it's nice and cool and that it's dry. The reason you want a dry location is because, again, these lids can rust. So if you're in a very moist, there's a lot of moisture, your lid could be compromised from the moisture. And again, that's going to affect your seal, and then compromise the food that's inside the jar. So cool, dry, and dark. That's your storage area. Okay? Now, you also want to use care where you store these foods. Where you have a pantry that you're storing them in, but how? So, some jars you can stack, but it's recommended you don't stack any higher than 2 deep. If you go higher than 2 deep, again, you can compromise the seal. Ideally, if you're going to stack jars, it's really good if you have something between, each layer. So you have a layer of jars, you have something, rigid, a board, a tray, something, and then you stack the next set of jars. But not any higher than 2 deep, unless you're dealing with the little, really small jelly jars and everything where you don't have a lot of weight on those seals. Because if you stack too high, that's something that could be a problem. You compromise the seal, and you want to protect the seal of your food, the seals on the jars, because you want to protect the contents inside. You want to make sure that they are safe and that they don't spoil. All right, so you have the place, the temperature, the conditions, and the storage, the way it's stored. Now, is it safe to seal these in boxes? Yes, it's fine to go ahead and, you might have kept your canning boxes. Go ahead and can your food, complete your processing, make sure everything, you check for seals, everything is clean, it's dry, and then you go ahead and put it back in the boxes and you store it in the boxes. That's fine to do. That works as well. Now, another recommendation is you never can more than you can use in a year. That's for quality. It's not for safety. If the food's older than a year, it has not become unsafe as long as you follow the tested recipe. You've done everything that the recipe has stated. You didn't skip any steps. You didn't replace things that are critical to the recipe. You've followed it. You can be assured that you have a safe food to eat. But if you use your canned food within 1 year, that's where you're going to have highest quality, because over time the quality of the food does go down. The safety is there. It's quality that you're looking out for. Okay, so go ahead and check out your canning. Find out where you're keeping your jars, if everything is good. You might not have known this, and you're like, oh yeah, I need to go check and make sure that my food is okay. If you see signs of leakage, you have residue on the jar, at the bottom of the shelves or the bottom of the box. There's residue, stickiness. You might have compromised seals, so you want to check those jars out, and those are the ones you want to discard. That's how you're properly storing food, but in honor of Black History Month, I wanted to highlight a food. So I'm highlighting sweet potatoes. So here's some sweet potatoes that I canned earlier, well, actually last year, and I happen to live in, North Carolina. I live in North Carolina. This is a huge sweet potato state, and I live in one of the top sweet potato producing counties. So there's a lot of sweet potatoes that you can get your hands on. So I had a great opportunity to can sweet potatoes. So sweet potatoes are a root vegetable that belong to the morning glory family. And it originated in the tropical regions of the Americas, and it is the state vegetable of North Carolina. No surprise there. Now, Adrian Miller said in his book, Soul Food, The Surprising Story of American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, that sweet potatoes were introduced to West Africa around the 16th century. But they really weren't a hit. People loved cassava and they loved yam, even though you might have heard of these referred to as yams, candy yams. We have the Ham and Yam Festival. It's not really yams, they're sweet potatoes. So when sweet potatoes were introduced to West Africa, people weren't really impressed about them because they take work. Sweet potatoes, in order to, you have to peel them, you have to do a few things to them. And they found the starchier cassava and the starchier yam better for the dishes that they were making. And when Africans were brought to the Americas via the transatlantic trade, transatlantic slave trade, the popular yam that they were used to consuming, it wasn't available anymore. So that's when sweet potatoes, they were available. And it was a big difference because cassava and yams are dry with a tougher bark, like a tougher skin to them, whereas sweet potatoes are moist, they're smooth, they're different consistency, they're not dry. But they may do, and they may do really well with these. So for many African Americans, sweet potato pie is a classic Southern dish, and you'll find this dish at funerals, baptisms, um, let's see, weddings, barbecues, holidays, any type of celebration, home warming gifts. Sweet potato pie is that classic um, pie, and it says Adrian Miller says it says home. That's why it's so popular, because when people think about sweet potato pie, a lot of times it brings back memories of home. Um, this past fall, I spoke about loving pumpkin so much. I was the odd one out in the family. In the sweet potato family, I was the one who preferred pumpkin. I love, if I had a choice between sweet potato pie and pumpkin pie, I mean, of course I would eat the sweet potato pie, but I would prefer pumpkin pie. But that doesn't mean that I don't like sweet potatoes. I mean, I like them enough to can them, and there are things that you can do with sweet potatoes that I personally don't think you can do with pumpkin. Um, you just can't separate them. Substitute the two out. Just doesn't work. So you think about things like sweet potato casserole or candy yams with marshmallows. That's a big treat. Sweet potato pone. Now, sweet potato pone happens to be that's something I remember from a kid, because that was my grandfather's favorite way to use sweet potatoes. He loved them. With sweet potato pone, you grate the sweet potato, and that's how you prepare the dish. Instead of mashing them, boiling them, mashing them, or anything like that, you grate them, and there's you add your ingredients, you do everything to make that, and it's really good. It's delicious. But I just remember that was his favorite pies, what have you, candy yams, whatever. That was his preferred way of having sweet potatoes. Um, but you think about it, you can do muffins, you can do dinner rolls. With the canned yams, you can use canned sweet potatoes. I'm saying it too. You can use them in any way that you would use a cooked sweet potato. So this would be they're perfect making pies, cakes, um, dinner rolls, breads. Um, you can whip sweet potatoes. That would be a great way to use these. Unfortunately, these are not appropriate for sweet potato pone. They're cooked. You can't do that. Um, so um, think of some ways, if you have canned sweet potatoes, or if you want to try them. I just remembered soup. You can do a sweet potato soup or a really thick soup, a bisque. Those are other ways that you can use it. But if you have a favorite sweet potato recipe, please drop that on your favorite way to have sweet potatoes. Please drop that in the section. I would love to hear how you use sweet potatoes. But that's it for this Wednesday stash. Make sure, go ahead and check those stored canned foods. Make sure you have them in the right place, because you want to put a lot of work into it. You want to make sure that they're going to be safe and of good quality. Join me next week, and I'm going to talk about vegetables that shrink or expand during processing. You have some vegetables, you put them in and they look very different after you finish processing them. And I'm going to talk about the why and which vegetables do that, and the steps that you need to take and keep in mind when you're processing different vegetables. And I'll also have a little bit of additional history for you. But that's it for this Wednesday stash. Thanks for joining me. If you have not already liked this, the Safe Plates Food Safety Information Center's page, go ahead and like it. This way you will receive the alerts when we have different things that are coming up. But that's it for now. Take care.